Happy Sunday, everybody. Greetings from Lake Tahoe, where we did not win the weather jackpot this time. Our family comes here every 3 years. We did our honeymoon here. It's a memorable place for my wife and her whole family. And every time we've come, it's been warm and awesome, and this time it's been cold and rainy. So taking a little bit easier of a weekend. We just were hanging out at the museum of the Donner Party, the folks trekking west that got trapped in the snow, and some of them turned into cannibals. It's been a wild week, and I'm going to start this musing sharing a little bit of the backstory of this 12-year-old boy, Jaiden Rodriguez. As many of you likely know, I was at the center of this mega viral social media bonanza this week. So I want to share a little bit of the backstory with you on how that all went down. And then finally some thoughts and musings on what we as Latter-day Saints in particular can learn from what Jaiden did and what our faith has to say about such things. So I was in Chicago this past week for a conference, and on Monday night, I was at a Chicago jazz concert kind of thing. It's pretty cool. And while there, I got a DM on Twitter from a woman asking for help. She was telling me that, hey, my 12-year-old boy is your biggest fan. This happened to him. He got kicked out of class. Can you help? The unfortunate thing about my role, my line of work, is that I get messages like this pretty regularly. I mean, at least like 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, I'll get an email at Libertas on our main email with parents talking about their kids being taken by, Child Protective Services wrongly, or, my business got punished, and so we often get people reaching out for help or to ask for something. And so being in that position, you have to be somewhat selective, and I often, have to just ignore and can't even deal with things because I've got so much, or our team has so much on our plate. Well, this particular DM caught me at a good time. I'm just hanging out playing, listening to some jazz, and she's saying, we could use your help. And she said, I have video. She sent me the video. So this is Jaiden's mom, sent me the video of this encounter. And so I was watching this video that evening, and immediately I knew this was gold. It was just immediately apparent that this thing would go viral once shared. And so I gave her my cell phone. We start texting back and forth. I'm asking a lot of questions about what happened, and she's saying, my son wants to stand up for his rights. Can you help us get the word out about this story? Because we try to get the media involved. So what had happened earlier in the day, for the 2 people out there who don't know the story yet, is that he had worn a Gadsden flag patch, the yellow "Don't Tread on Me" patch, to school. In weeks prior, he had been sporting other patches. He's a big Second Amendment fan. He had a Firearms Policy Council patch, other gun-related things. They made him take those down, and he complied with those because it was explicitly against the school district policy on firearms, and so he did comply with those. However, he did not comply with the Gadsden flag, and he continued to wear it. That led to him getting kicked out of class on Monday, beginning of the school year. He gets kicked out of class. Mom is nearby running errands or something, and so she gets a call and comes to meet with the vice principal. This is at a charter school in Colorado Springs, a charter school that was founded a few decades ago to be very, pro-American history and patriotic and all the rest. I posted on Twitter this morning a letter to the editor that was published this weekend by one of the founders of this school from like 30 years ago, talking about how, what their ideals were and what the intent was behind this charter school. And the individual pointed out that, these institutions get dominated by the left. When you leave an institution on autopilot and you don't take particular care to make sure that the administrators you're hiring are aligned in terms of culture, they're going to steer it left. And that's what's happened to this school. So he gets kicked out. Mom comes in. She records the interaction. Most states are what are called a single-party recording state. Utah is one, so is Colorado, where you are legally allowed to record any conversation or meeting that you are a party to. And so she was well within her rights to record this video. As you've no doubt seen, she documented this insane vice principal claiming that they've decided and the policy and I'm just following orders and all this stuff. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. And she just, spouting this nonsense. Well, when I posted on Twitter the following morning, not only did I post the video, but I posted screenshots of the email that the mom was sending back and forth with the school director, where the school director was making all sorts of wild claims. They're all claiming that the flag has origins in racism and slavery. More particularly, they said slavery, not just racism. And then it's a disruption to the class. And at no point in the video or in the emails did anyone talk about firearms patches. So when the school later got a ton of flack, they came out with a statement saying, the issue at hand is the firearms patches, and we've asked him to take them down, and he's taken them all down except for this one, but it's a much bigger issue. Total BS. As you can see for yourself in the video, but also in the emails that I shared, their entire focus was on the Gadsden flag. So that night, Monday night, I get the video. I'm texting with his mom. Her name is Eden. And I was like, are you okay with me posting that? Yeah. So I shared it at 8 a.m. the next morning. I'm at this conference. Tuesday for me was an insanely busy day. I had like 9 back-to-back meetings. And so I step into my first meeting in the morning after having just posted the tweet. And I come out an hour later and it's already got like 8 million views or something. Libs of TikTok has shared it. All these, conservative, right-wing type Twitter accounts are all reposting it. And it just starts getting tons of traction. Then other influencer, whoever people would download the video instead of just reposting mine. Because if you repost mine, then those views that individual gets on their profile gets attributed to the main video, mine. So the original tweet gets, a ton of impressions. However, if you download the video and just post it as your own, then that doesn't add to the count. So when I last counted 3 days ago, and I've kind of seen and been tagged, in all these different threads where other people are posting the video. It's probably got a combined view count of about 50 million. Just crazy. So my phone starts blowing up. And again, it's the worst timing because I'm in all these meetings and I've silenced my phone, but I know what's going on. And so all my meetings, I kind of ended each of them a little bit early and tried to rush through them so that I would have 5 or 10 minutes before the next meeting to fire off, replies. I was getting DMs and emails and texts from all kinds of reporters all over the place. And everyone wants to talk to this kid. I mean, Sean Hannity's people reach out, Glenn Beck, Piers Morgan, the Daily Mail, The Hill, all these, and the biggest thing was conservative talk radio hosts. I got scores and scores and scores and scores of messages from, so-and-so in Cincinnati with the, talk radio there. There's just so many of them. And so I was basically a filter for the mom to only let through requests that I thought were worthy of their time. Her younger kids were all puking their guts out. It was bad timing for them that all this blew up. Meanwhile, Jaiden is loving it. He's loving going from being the, odd man out to being the popular kid at school. He gets interviewed by, Ben Shapiro and all these different people. It was kind of fun. I posted this on Twitter, so some of you may have seen it, but we edited a little video compiling all these reactions and to the story. And when Ben Shapiro asked him, Jaiden, he's like, "Why did you get so political? How do you know so much about American history?" And Jaiden says, "Oh, I give credit to Connor Boyack and the Tuttle Twins books. I've been reading." It was funny. He said, "I've been reading them when I was growing up." The kid's 12. So he credited the Tuttle Twins with helping him understand his rights and standing up for them, which was pretty fun. So I'll probably, never mind. I was about to reveal what I'm going to be doing with Jaiden soon, but save that for another day. The point in sharing all of this is, I mean, I see Jaiden as an excellent example of someone who understands truth and stands up for it. You can see in the video, you can see when the vice principal is claiming that it's connected to slavery and all this nonsense, that Jaiden is just smirking. He's trying to hold it back. Kid is pretty well mannered, right? He's not interjecting. He's letting his mom run the show, but he's like kind of rolling his eyes and looking at his mom like, "Are you kidding me? This is what we're dealing with." And here's a kid who understands truth. His mom has taught him well. Kind of reminds me of the stripling warriors, you know, these kids that have been raised up by good parents. And so it's fascinating to me to see what an understanding, what knowledge of truth can do to empower you. So I think one of the biggest takeaways I have from this is the profound ignorance that we have in our society, especially about historical matters, means that you are not able to actualize your agency to the degree that you might otherwise do. You are impotent. You are unable to act. You are instead acted upon because you don't know any better. It's the proverbial example of your neighbor who keeps pushing their refuse and furniture and crap on their property. Okay, loud vehicle. You know, they keep pushing it from their property over to yours. The problem is that you don't have the deed to the property, or you don't know quite where the property boundary is. You don't know if he actually crossed the property boundary, or you kind of think he did, but you don't know for sure. So you're not really empowered to act and say, "Hey, dude, this far and no further," right? This is the property boundary. Stay on your side. That requires knowledge of where the boundary is so that you can assert and defend the boundary. But if you don't understand history, if you don't understand truth, if your own comprehension about basic historical and civic or religious and other type of information, if it is lacking, then you are not going to be able to stand up for truth. You are going to be deceived. You are going to be acted upon rather than acting. You may have heard me share this before. I've shared it in various speeches and little social media things that I've posted over the past few months. But it was about 2 or 3 months ago that a new statistic came out. They measured 8th graders in government schools across the country. And they found that for civics and American history, only 13% of them, 1-3, not 3-0, 13% were proficient in American history. So it gets to this point of like, those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. No wonder we have the rising generation just swallowing socialism and the like wholesale, because we're producing a bunch of ignoramuses. Jaiden is the exception to the mediocre, ignorant rule. And so again, one of my lessons, one of my takeaways is that this is such a great example of the need for knowledge. Had Jaiden not been reading the Tuttle Twins books, this would not have happened. He would not have wanted to assert his rights. He would not have known about First Amendment type stuff. He would not have been aware of and interested in things like the Gadsden flag. It's a 12-year-old kid. What normal, quote-unquote, 12-year-old kid cares about that kind of stuff? But he did, because he had materials and a mom, parents who would teach him the truth. So I think that's one important lesson that I take away from this. The other is, it's one thing to know, right? What was that G.I. Joe? Knowing is half the battle, or something like that. I was remembering from the 80s, those cartoons. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle. Well, what's the other half? The other half is courage. It's standing up and actually, standing for what you believe. Actually vocalizing and telling that neighbor, hey, you're over the boundary. Knock it off. Get back on the other side. It's one thing to know where the boundary is. It's another thing to defend it and say, dude, get off my lawn. And so knowledge is great. It's important. It is a necessary prerequisite, but it is insufficient. You can be highly knowledgeable and completely apathetic and not actively standing up for what you believe. I mean, I think of another young kid, a little older than Jaiden, Helmut Hubener, right? The German Mormon boy, the youngest individual to be formally sentenced to death by the Nazis. He was 15. And he broke the law and listened to the BBC radio and transcribed what was being said and wrote pamphlets with his two friends, they go distribute it, these little leaflets, into people's, suit pockets and bulletin boards and mailboxes and the like. And he was caught and he was sentenced to death, executed, beheaded. And so here's a kid who has knowledge. I mean, you can actually find online Helmut Huebner's essays, the ones that have survived, and there's whatever you call them, pamphlets, leaflets. You can find transcriptions of them. Kid sounds like he's 25. I mean, he writes super well. Really, really thrilling writing. Just very pointed, very barbed, very descriptive of what was going on. The kid is a young teenager. So again, knowledge, right? Helmut had knowledge, but then he stood up and acted. He decided to break the law. He decided to do something very risky, to stand up for the truth, to stand against tyranny. You've probably seen that photo of all the people saluting the Heil Hitler, thing, and there's just this one guy with his arms folded. You've seen this photo online. I have it hanging on my wall at the office. The guy's name is August Landmesser. And when you look at that photo, you've seen it, I'm sure. When you see that, the natural reaction many of us have is, oh, I would totally be like that guy, right? Yeah, not doing the Hitler salute, not doing what everyone else is doing. Stand up to tyranny, right? Like, we like to think that we would be like that. And yet history is replete with examples that prove the exact opposite, that most people do not have the courage. They do not stand against the masses. They do not defy authority. They do not stand their ground. Many of them knew otherwise. I mean, one of the most fascinating books I've read is from a gentleman named Milton Mayer. It's called They Thought They Were Free. And he interviews all these Germans trying to understand, how did you support Nazism? Why did you go along with this? And he interviews people from various walks of life. And the main takeaway, if I were to distill this book down, is that people would say that it was so incremental. And they would suppress their conscience, right? Oh, that thing yesterday, yeah, I didn't like that. That sounded horrible. And this thing, it's only a little worse. I didn't speak out yesterday, so why am I going to speak out today? And they habituated themselves into inaction. They proved to themselves that they were not a person to speak up, because they had a consistent set of behaviors testifying to that truth. And so they just lived according to that truth and continued to not speak up. So that book is called They Thought They Were Free by Milton Mayer. Very, very insightful, revealing book. That guy who was folding his arms, August, he was wedded to a Jewish woman who had been increasingly harassed and punished. And so he was kind of pissed off. That's why he wasn't folding his arms. He was not a big fan of what the Nazis were doing. That photo was taken at a shipyard, at a christening of a ship, and Hitler had just walked up onto the podium. And later August was imprisoned. He was drafted into military service where he was killed in action. Related example, let's go back in history a little bit. Do you remember the story? Guy's name is Alexander Donovan. He was in the military, and in 1838 he was given an order by Major General Samuel Lucas of the Missouri State Militia. This was what the order said. This is the order from the Major General to Alexander Donovan. Sir, you will take Joseph Smith and the other prisoners into the public square of Far West and shoot them at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Alexander Donovan, a brigadier general in the militia, received formal orders from his commanding superior to execute Joseph Smith and his associates. Well, he received this order, and then he replied to his superior, "It is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. My brigade shall march for Liberty, the town, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, and if you execute these men, I will hold you responsible before an earthly tribunal, so help me God." Now, this guy Donovan was not a member of our faith. He didn't subscribe to the same theology of Joseph Smith, but he understood what was right and what was wrong. He had knowledge. He was informed about what was proper. right? And the need for due process, the need to not just summarily execute prisoners like that. So he had knowledge, but then he had courage to defy his commanding officers. Final story that I'll share. So you remember the Nuremberg trials, right? Highly publicized, top military brass of Germany being put on trial for war crimes, crimes against humanity. And one of the defenses that they used, the primary defense that they used, was that they were just following orders, right? Just like this vice principal at the Vanguard School in Colorado Springs. This is our policy. I'm just following orders. It's what they decided. I'm just here to be the messenger, right? And so we get past the Nuremberg trials, and there were many Nazis who had escaped Germany before the Allies all kind of came in and captured all the high-ranking brass. There were a lot of top military leaders who snuck out. By the by, there were a bunch of top scientists in the Nazi party who were, not only did they not need to escape, they were invited by the U.S. government to come to America, forgiven of all their sins and all the horrific things that they participated in, because U.S. government officials felt like they would be of value to the U.S. government with all the knowledge that they had. And so Nazi doctors were brought over to become American doctors. That is one of many stories that we tell in a forthcoming book that hopefully, if the printer timeline goes well, will be published next month on Friday the 13th in October. It's called The Tuttle Twins' Guide to True Conspiracies. Every chapter is a different conspiracy. I think the book is going to be a hit. It's got some pretty spicy stuff. So stay tuned on that. That's coming out next month. But back to the Nazis. So a bunch of them escaped, including Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was this guy who had directly overseen the logistics required to deport the millions of Jews, men, women, children, to the ghettos and to the extermination camps. So this guy was like top dog of mass deportation to exterminate all these Jews. Well, at the war's conclusion, he had fled to Argentina using false papers. And he had been living there ever since. He was kidnapped by Israeli agents in 1960. These Israeli agents were going all over the world, basically hunting Nazis. And he was, like the guys at Nuremberg 15 years prior, he was charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. His trial was widely televised because it had been 15 years, and the Jews wanted the whole world to remember, right, the Holocaust and not let this stuff start to fade from memory. And there were many people watching this televised trial of Adolf Eichmann being prosecuted for war crimes, where he started to assert the defense, like his predecessors, that I was just following orders. One of the individuals watching that television program was named Stanley Milgram. He was a psychologist and researcher, and he thought that was curious, this idea that you were just following orders. So he created an experiment that he conducted was it Yale or Harvard or one of these, I can't remember. And what he would do is he brought the participant. Let's say I am the subject of the experiment. I would be introduced into a room in front of a big box with a bunch of knobs. And a doctor-looking individual, an individual in a lab coat and clipboard, would come into the room and would instruct me that on the other side of the wall in the adjacent room is an individual that is hooked up to an electrical whatever, and the machine that I have in front of me is to administer electric shocks to that individual in progressively large amounts, starting very small and then larger. And the purpose of this experiment is to, evaluate the machine and so forth, and that the individual in the other room has consented. So I would then be instructed, okay, flip the first switch or turn the knob, and I hear from the other room, ow, right? And then the guy in the lab coat, oh, interesting, writing down observations. Okay, please do the next one. And then I would turn the knob for the next one. Ow, right? A little bit louder. And so it would go, right? Several more. until all of a sudden on the other side of the room, my kids come out like, why are you screaming? What's that noise for? It would get so bad that you would have the guy in the other room screaming bloody murder. Let me off of this thing. Unplug this thing right now. I don't consent anymore. Blah, blah, blah. Right? And you hear this screaming. And I'd be sitting there in the room like, oh, crap. Like, this is bad. What's going on? And I would be instructed by the authority figure in the lab coat. No, it's very important that this experiment finish, get to the conclusion. So you need to do the next one. So I do the next one, and there wouldn't be any response. Silence. Oh, crap. Did I just kill the guy? Right? And then I would be instructed, do the next one. This experiment, it's called the Milgram experiment, has consistently shown, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of crap psychology research out there that can't be replicated. In other words, someone claims, our research found this, and then when somebody else attempts to replicate that experiment, it fails. So much of the psychological literature and research out there is bogus. So don't believe what you hear when people claim, researchers found X or psychologists believe X, because oftentimes, until it's been replicated, it's worth still being skeptical about. But the Milgram experiment has been consistently replicated. Different genders, different ages, different cultures, different everything. And consistently it finds that over 2/3, it's either over 60% or 2/3, but it's 60% plus of individuals will administer fatal doses of electricity to an unseen person in the other room simply because a guy in a lab coat and a clipboard told him to. Now, the ruse here is that there was no person in the other room. It's just an audio recording, right, with pre-recorded reactions. So the individual, me in this example, was led to believe that the subject of the experiment was in the other room, and they're the ones that they're gathering data on, when in reality they're gathering data on me and whether I'm willing to suppress my conscience and potentially kill another individual simply because an authoritative-looking person told me to, right? I have no knowledge in this experiment that this person has any actual credentialed, legitimate authority. He just is dressed in a lab coat and sometimes is holding a clipboard. But the ability of authority to get us to do things we otherwise would not is shocking. I talk about this study, the Milgram experiment, and others like it in a book that I'm working on right now, not a Tuttle Twins book, called Mind Wars, and all about the ways in which we are today in a mind war, that people are trying to manipulate us, and that too many people are casualties on the intellectual and psychological battlefield. And what does it say in the New Testament? Paul talks about how we fight not against, princes and priests, but against principalities and dark forces, or whatever that verse says, right? Because that's what we're up against, is the unseen forces. It's easy to fight an enemy that you see and that you understand. We would never send our children to battle in faraway lands if they didn't have, weapons and body armor and training and knowledge of who the enemy is and how they might be under attack and what the rules of engagement are. We would think it ludicrous to just send our kids off to some battlefield without any of that at a minimum. And yet, we send our children out into the world without any psychological or intellectual or spiritual armor and weaponry and knowledge of who the enemy is and how the enemy attacks and what the rules of engagement are and how to not only defend ourselves from the enemy's attacks, but how to go on the offense and fight back and stand for truth. So I'm about halfway done with that book. I don't know when it will come out. Probably sometime early next year. So that's Mind Wars. Anyways, back to the point and wrapping up here. Talking about Jaiden. We will have opportunities in our life to stand for truth. It might be a Facebook comment. It might be a public meeting. It might be a letter to the editor. It might be a colleague at work who is disparaging something that you know to be true. It could be your faith. It could be an economic issue. It could be historical issue, whatever, right? We need knowledge and we need courage. We have to stand for truth. For us Latter-day Saints, when we are baptized, we make a covenant to stand as witnesses of God at all times and in all things and in all places. even unto death. That is the covenant. That is what we've said that we will do, is to stand as a witness, to stand for truth. Doctrine and Covenants 123, I've shared this before, and I'll share it many times again. This is when Joseph is in the jail, ironically called Liberty Jail. And he says that there's an imperative duty that we owe, not only to our own wives and children, but to the widows, the fatherless. It's also an imperative duty that we owe to all the rising generation and to all the pure in heart. For there are many yet on the earth who are blinded by the subtle craftiness of men, whereby they lie in wait to deceive, and who are only kept from the truth because they know not where to find it. Therefore, we should waste and wear out our lives in bringing to light all the hidden things of darkness, wherein we know them. So we have to know them. We have to learn this stuff. Wherein we know them, and they are truly manifest from heaven. These things should be attended to with great earnestness. Let no one count them as small things, for there is much which lieth in futurity, in the future, pertaining to the saints, which depends upon these things. We've been commanded to stand for truth. Every man who's been warned is required to warn his neighbor. We are supposed to seek knowledge out of the best books. We are supposed to educate one another. We are supposed to build this knowledge and then act upon it. We are to act and not be acted upon. And yet we live in a society of profound ignorance, when in our gospel doctrine classes, people can't answer basic questions. Scriptural literacy is in the tank. Deseret Book is financially struggling because all that the saints are buying is fluffy fiction, and all the theological books and all the nonfiction whatever is, not really moving much product. We are in a time of spiritual and intellectual mediocrity. But here's Joseph saying there is much which lieth in futurity pertaining to the saints, which depends upon us knowing the hidden things of darkness and wasting and wearing out our lives in bringing these things to light. Look, a Gadsden flag patch on a backpack in a government school is not some massive crisis, but it is an instance and an example of the opportunities that we have, even small ones, to stand for truth. And just like those Germans who Milton Mayer interviewed, and they said that they didn't stand up for the small things, so why would they stand up for the big things? They had trained themselves into inaction. They had proven to themselves that they were not someone who did not stand up because they didn't stand up earlier and for the small things. If we don't train ourselves to be people who have knowledge and act upon it, then when it really counts, when it really matters, we're absolutely not going to engage. If we don't take advantage of the small opportunities now, by small and simple things or great things brought to pass, right? Line upon line. We're being tested with the small stuff. If a 12-year-old kid can stand up against all the school administrators and teachers giving him the stink eye and getting him in trouble with his mom and kicking him out of class, right? What can we learn from him? What can we learn from the Helmut Hubeners of the world and the August Landmessers and the Alexander Donophans, all these people who, when given the opportunity to stand up when it was hard, they did so. Chances are they had stood up when things were easier and smaller matters before, that we just have lost to the historical record. Again, we like to think that at some grandiose time when we're called to act that we're going to do it. But if we're proving to ourselves that we are not people who speak out, if we don't protest mask mandates and government, enforced shutdowns of businesses and churches and all this absurd crap and police abuse and excessive taxation and spying and First Amendment, like if we don't speak up and stand out when all this stuff is being normalized and made consistent, we are not going to be included amongst the heroes who in the future stand up when it really counts. We have to do it even when it seems small, even when it seems insignificant. That, to me, is the inspiration of Jaiden. I've got a wall in my office full of examples of people who engaged in some form of resistance or civil disobedience, like August Landmesser. I've got the big old canvas printed on the wall at my office where I've got him sitting there folding his arms. Jaiden is going on the wall because it's an inspiration to me of someone who obtained knowledge and had the courage to act on it. I think we all have to ask ourselves, including me, if I were in Jaiden's shoes, would I have gone along with it? If next time I'm told to do something that I think is wrong, or that I don't want to do, or it's immoral, or whatever, am I going to go along with it? Everyone else is going along with it, or some authority figure told me to, right? These pressures, these psychological pressures, our brain is so susceptible to them. And I'll talk about that more in my Mind Wars book because I'm digging in deep on that issue. But our brains are at a disadvantage when it comes to this stuff. So we have to decide. Just like, you remember when you were a teenager and your parents might say something like, you need to decide now not to use drugs. So that in the future, if you're ever tempted with drugs, you won't have to make a decision in real time when all those temptations and social pressures are coming in upon you. You will have already made the decision, and then you just need to follow through on that past decision. Because the decision is your identity. I am a person who does not do drugs. It is easier to act in accordance with your identity rather than just making continual one-off decisions that are circumstantial. Oh, I've been offered this. Okay, well, sure. Why not, right? No, if your identity is, I don't do drugs, it is much easier to act in conformity with that identity. So we need, I think, to make our identity, make the decision now that our identity is someone who stands for truth, who stands up against oppression, who resists tyranny. Resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. We have to decide now that in the future when these opportunities present themselves, that we will be a person who stands up, so that we are not evaluating the specific circumstances in the future to weigh the trade-offs and decide, the social pressures and all the reasons that will be abundant for why we shouldn't. I think we need to decide now. From Lake Tahoe. Kind of chilly, wearing my jacket. A little bit rainy, but we're going to go out and figure out how to have some fun nonetheless. Hope you guys have a great weekend.